The business of art is to reveal the relation between man and his environment. D.H. Lawrence, English novelist, short story writer, poet, playwright, literary critic, travel writer, essayist, and painter. All right. Welcome to another morning episode of the Liberty Dad podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. If you're tuning in live, I want to especially thank you for giving me your time so early. What do we have today? Well, over the weekend, there was a little bit of controversy. And by a little bit, I mean a, on a global scale. The Olympics opening ceremony Friday got a lot of people upset, including me, yours truly. So let's take a look at some of these tweets that happened over the weekend. Let's see what we've got here. Where was some of these? Let's see. There we go. All right, let's get some of these up on the screen there. So we've got. I don't know who this person is, but I've seen him coming around. On my feed. Gluttonous queers, drag queens, and transvestites mocking the Last Supper of our Lord at the 2024 Olympics. They're not even hiding it anymore. Um, Cameras in the way. The woke are agents of Satan who hate Christianity. This is why we fight. We fight against demons and rulers of darkness. Another one. I'm not religious, but the French depiction of the Last Supper is blatant disrespect and incitement. Man, I got to figure out how to do this a little differently. Give me a second here. How about this? Jesus is portrayed as a woman and the disciples as transvestites. I wonder why they didn't mock Islam in a similar way. Actually, don't answer, as I know why. Another tweet said, in this scene from the last opening ceremony, the famous painting of the Last Supper is recreated, but Jesus is replaced with an obese woman, while queer and trans figures, including a child, depict her apostles. Overt pagan and satanic symbolism. And then another tweet here, the opening ceremony of the Olympics, making fun of Christ and the Last Supper. Is anyone out there still denying that LGBTQ is a demonic cult? And the tweets like that went on and on. In fact, including one of mine. So here is what I ended up posting. Similarly, I said, we're told trans people are just trying to exist. That's not this. And while there appear to be more than 13 people, there's no way anyone thought this was anything other than mocking Christianity. And WTF does this have to do with the Olympics? I then went on to say, I followed that tweet up with a second one where I said, and yes, I'm aware this is drag, which is different than trans. The communities overlap or at least share social space. Ultimately, this will make it harder for communities who share such space and does not move humanity forward. So the big question here is, what is everybody angry about? What in the, like what what got people so angry that they're just tweeting in a fury? Well, here's the clip. Here is a clip of the Olympics opening ceremony. It's not the whole thing, but it is just a very quick clip to give you an idea of what happened. All right, so there we see this is what appears to be the Last Supper. They're panning out on this, and then I think they pan over a little bit to the right as we watch this. All right, so yep, there they go. Now they're panning over to the right, and it kind of does look like the Last Supper. But the real question is it? Well, as it turned out, even some personalities were getting in on this. So here is Andrew Tate. You may know Andrew Tate. He's a very popular person on Twitter and social media influencer, whether you like him or not. So here's him protesting. He actually was protesting out there in Romania.
They didn't. Firstly, they're not sorry. This was signed off on. And to sit here and let France mock the country, mock your religion, make fun of every single thing you feel holy. This is the Last Supper. This is everything holy about Christianity. And we say absolutely nothing about it and say, oh, you cannot even complain. What are we doing wrong by saying that this is disgusting? This is not art. Everyone at They don't try and trick you or deceive you. If I give you a poison apple and you eat it, I murder you. If I say this is a poison apple, all of this is done on purpose. They're telling you exactly what's going to happen.
All right. So that's him protesting over in Romania. So this incident got a lot of attention. And it got to the point where the creative director and the Olympics spokesperson came out and they apologized for what happened. So here is their apology so we can see, what they said. You might have to read some of it. Maybe I'll pause it and read it because I believe the creative director of this event is French and does not speak English. So let's play that clip.
Clearly, there was never an intention to show disrespect to any religious group. On the contrary, I think that Thomas Joly really tried to really intend to celebrate community tolerance. That was his word yesterday. And looking at the result of the polls that we shared, we believe that this ambition was achieved. If people have taken any offense, we are of course really, really sorry.
Ma volonté n'est pas d'être subversif ni de
All right. So he says, I did not intend to be subversive or to mock or shock.
me moquer ni de choquer. Ma volonté est simplement
I wanted to say that we're this big name,
de dire que nous sommes ce grand nous et que
and last night there were Republican ideas,
hier soir, c'était des idées républicaines, c'était des idées
inclusive ideas,
d'inclusion, c'était
ideas of kindness,
des idées de bienveillance, de générosité,
of generosity,
des idées de solidarité,
ideas of solidarity,
bref, de ce que je crois
which I think we desperately need.
nous avons follement besoin. En France, on a le droit
In France, we're allowed to love who we want, how we
de
want.
s'aimer comme on veut, avec qui on veut. En France, on a le droit
In France, we can believe or not believe.
de croire ou de ne pas croire. En France,
In France, we have a lot of rights.
on a le droit, on a beaucoup de droits, voilà. Et c'était
And I wanted to convey those values throughout this ceremony.
l'idée de faire transparaître ces valeurs-là à travers la cérémonie.
All right. So that's the end of that clip there. And so like this was like wrapped up. It was big. And the big question that we all have to ask ourselves is, what is the truth here? Were they actually trying to mock Christianity, or did we all get ahead of ourselves? Well, and some of you may not like this, but it doesn't appear so when we examine the actual evidence. It actually seems that all of us, myself included, kind of jumped the gun on this, and we got a bit ahead of ourselves. And we may owe some people an apology. Now, the claim is that this wasn't a depiction of the Last Supper, but that it was a depiction of Dionysus, the Greek god. So let's take a look. First, let's lay out what we're gonna do here. We're gonna look at some of the evidence. We're gonna look at it based on the timeline of things, because I think the timeline is gonna help us get the best idea of what the actual intent was and how things played out. Now, we'll never know for sure because the director there, the creative director, he could just be telling us what we want to hear after the fact. Hey, look, this is what I was trying to do. I wasn't really trying to mock Christianity. And it's possible that maybe he really was, and he did it in a clever way to help give him an out later. And it's also possible that he's being completely forthright. So the opening ceremony started at 1:30 p.m. It was broadcasted on NBC, and then it was re-aired 7:30 p.m. And this was on Friday being the 26th. So again, 1:30 p.m. in the afternoon, that's when it started. It was aired on NBC, and then it re-aired again 6 hours later, 6:30 p.m. Friday night. Now, the official Olympic Games, their official X account posted something at 4:10 p.m. Eastern time. So let's take a look at that image and see what they posted out to see what we can learn from what's going on here. So here's what they posted, and we can see that it says the interpretation of the Greek god Dionysus makes us aware of the absurdity of violence between human beings. And we can see that he's lifted up, or that they're lifting up like a plate. And we can see this, alleged Greek god, which a lot of people called a blue smurf. That's what a lot of people pointed to on social media. And they said, "Oh, there's a blue smurf doing all this weird stuff, right?" And then he's on a plate full of what appears to be like flowers and maybe some vegetables and whatnot. And then behind him, we can see the drag show, which a lot of people allege to be the Last Supper. And so what they're saying is like this is a feast of the gods. And that was the claim. Now I want to point out at the very bottom here, we can see the timestamp does say 4:10 p.m. July 26th. So this is before all the controversy erupted, because the controversy, as we'll see in just a moment, it didn't really get into full swing until later. Okay, so the ceremony starts at 1:30, re-aired at 7:30. In between that, at 4:10, the Olympics tweets out, and this doesn't appear to be a tweet to say like, "Hey, look, we're sorry, you got it misunderstood." It doesn't appear to be anything like that. It just appears to be a tweet, just kind of saying, "Here's our thoughts on what's happening." So then we go and we can do some really some really useful Twitter searches, and we can look at Google Trends, and that will help us get an idea whether or not this actually might be a legitimate claim. So let's take a look at one of the Twitter searches. I'm gonna pull that up on the screen here. Give me a second to swap on over to it. So this is going to be a search for the Last Supper. So we're going to start with that. All right. So we're cutting over here, and what I did here, I did a search, and you can go to Twitter and you can narrow your search. So you can search just Last Supper and see what comes up, but you can also search with date ranges. I don't know if you knew this or not, but you can type in. So what I typed in was a Last Supper, and then I used some uh like Twitter has. I'm trying to think of the term that they use, but they have some search operators. That's the term I was looking for. They have some search operators. You can use until and since. So I said Last Supper, search until July 7th, July 27th, 2024, and since July 26th, 2024. So I basically am getting everything from July 26th. So I just want to see what's going on in that day. Now, as far as I know, you cannot search based on timestamp. So I can't say like, hey, give me everything from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. But I can at least narrow it down by day. And so here's what happened. Here's what we see on Friday. And these are some of the tweets, and I pulled some of these up. The 2024 Paris Olympics has gone full woke, dystopian. Opening ceremony was filled with transgender mockery. Why do people do this? Like, can we stop? Okay, can we really can we stop abbreviating things with an asterisk? Like, this is so ridiculous. I see people do it with the word retard and with, transgender, and I saw it with like assassination. Like, just stop. Just write the whole word out. We are literally all adults. We should act like it. Like you can't you would never in conversation you wouldn't be like trans. I don't even know how you would say this. Right. So we should stop writing it like that. This is so ridiculous. This reminds me, and I'm sorry, I'm taking a little bit of a deviation here, but this reminds me of the trigger word warnings that we used to have years ago, when they would like, even old works, they would be like, oh, we got to remove the N word because, we can't read that word. And that would be very offensive, out of works that were written like, 100 years ago or something. Stop doing this. Just write the whole word out. We're all big kids. We can read the word transgender. We don't need to, to add notation to it so that you don't have to write the whole word out. That's just ridiculous. But anyway, it says the opening ceremony was filled with transgender mockery of the Last Supper, the golden calf idol, and even the pale horse from the book of Revelation. The Olympics has made it clear that Christian viewers aren't welcome. Okay. And we see another one here. And so some of these ones are the ones that I showed in just a moment ago. Opening ceremony of the Olympics, making fun of Christ in the Last Supper. Go down, blasphemy of the Last Supper. In this scene from the opening ceremony, the famous painting of the Last Supper is recreated, but Jesus is replaced with an obese woman. I'm not religious. Some of these I already read. The Paris Olympics have gone full blown satanic, going so far as to mock the Last Supper of Christ and have a celebration of worship, on and on and on and on. So, again, this is when you type in Last Supper, we'll go back up to the very top here so that you can see it on the screen. Or does it not show? It doesn't show because the way I have it set up. But the way I have it, but if you type in Last Supper until colon and then type in 2024-07-27, that will allow you to use these search operators. If you want a course on it, just go to Google and type in Twitter search operators. And then you will come up with a page and it will tell you how you can actually search and specify certain things that you're looking for. So this is these are tweets about the Last Supper, again from Friday. So now let's take a look at Dionysus, just the word, and we're gonna see what Twitter comes up with for the same date range, Friday. We go over to that page, and we can see the top one, and of course it does say top, and I can get the latest if I wanted. But the top tweet for Dionysus on Friday, the day the Olympics started, was from the official Olympics games. Okay. Then we scroll down and we see, I'm not sure Dionysus was a Smurf. Okay. And so this was on July 26th again. And we could even further narrow it down if we wanted to. We can narrow our search to specific days, and then we can click on individual tweets to look at the timestamp to get an idea. So if I were to click on this particular tweet, I can see that its timestamp is 4:07 p.m. So it's roughly about the same time that the official Olympics posted their tweet. Okay, so then we go down. Why didn't NBC show us this dude? Justice for the Greek god of Dionysus, Paris 2024. This is not the Olympics. This is a freak show. Meanwhile, Olympics claims this Smurf is the Greek god Dionysus. Shaking my head. Let's see, that's something else that's I add, I think. Interesting take on Dionysus during the Olympic opening ceremony this evening. Not sure he would have ever have called for calm and sobriety, so on and so forth. So we see that there is a mixture of people on the same day. So some people have identified and said, okay, this does appear to be an interpretation of Dionysus. However, some people were like, I don't know if he would be blue. I don't know if he would be doing this. This is kind of a weird, way to present him, to depict him, whatnot. And then you had other tweets where people were like, I can't believe you. You're mocking the Last Supper. So you have these at the same time. Now let's take a look and let's go to Google Trends. And I may have to give me a second here on Google Trends. Let me do something different here so that I can show it to you on full here. There we go. So we will go and show this. There we are. Much better. Okay, so this is now Google Trends. And what I did was I typed in Dionysus and Last Supper. So Dionysus will be the blue line, and then the Last Supper will be the red line. And so if we zoom in a little bit so we can see this a little bit better, we can see that the Last Supper has a huge amount of searches on Google Trends. And so what Google Trends does is it just shows you what people are searching for, how many times people have come searching for a particular word or phrase or whatever you type in. And so what I did was I said, I want to see over the past 7 days. So that was this. So this represents the past 7 days from now. So if we look, we can see that over here where there's basically nothing, this pops up. Does it pop? Yeah, it does pop up. It says July 26, 2024 at 4 p.m. So at 4 p.m., nothing was really trending. Now, I'll remind you, This started at 1:30 p.m. And so then we go and we see that it starts trending at it starts getting pretty hot at 10 p.m. So that's after the Olympics had been rebroadcasted, which makes sense because a lot of people were probably still at work at 1:30 p.m. and maybe did not yet see the opening Olympics or the opening ceremony. Now, I want to remind you the timestamps here. The timestamp is that the event started at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time. It was rebroadcasted at 7:30 p.m. At 4:10 p.m., and this is all Eastern time, at 4:10 p.m., the Olympics made their tweet simply describing Dionysus as what this is about. And they're more telling you kind of like their interpretation of it rather than making an argument and saying, no, 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 this is not the Last Supper. This is Dionysus. So they're not there yet. They're not at the point where they're defending themselves. They're at the point where they're simply describing their event. And we can see that at if we go back to like 1 p.m., well, I guess that would be too early. So if we go back to 2 p.m., there's virtually nothing. And then it starts climbing up and we start seeing that by 10 p.m., there's a nice little peak for Last Supper searches. At this time, there are no searches for Dionysus yet. So then it drops down a little bit, which would make sense. It's 4 a.m. We're supposed to be sleeping, right? Effectively. So then it peaks again at 9 a.m. on Saturday, July 27th. And then we see from there, it kind of stays up pretty high all throughout the day. And then we get down again Sunday morning at 4 a.m. It drops. Again, we're all sleeping. Apparently, some people were not because it's still a little higher than it was at 4 a.m. the night on the night prior or the morning prior. But we also see now that Dionysus is trending a little bit now over on Saturday, July 27th at 9 p.m. Okay. So now we're starting to see some trending from Dionysus. So the question is, what does this tell us? And we can see that there's somewhat right here, right about here. We can see it goes up and it comes down. We can also see that for the Last Supper. It goes up and it comes down a bit more, and then it goes up again, and it also goes up same time for Dionysus. So now they're kind of trending. They are showing the same trend, but with disparate actual searches. So we've got significantly more searches for the Last Supper. Presumably, what this is telling us is that people were trying to verify and say, let me look at the Last Supper so that I can compare and see what does the Last Supper look like compared to what the um, what I'm seeing on television. You know, these clips that I'm seeing, these screenshots that I'm seeing. And so presumably, and then we can see that people had posted like pictures of them side by side, one on top of the other, kind of saying like, look, here's the Last Supper. Here's what the Olympics did. Can you see the resemblance? And there is indeed a resemblance. You know, even myself, I was part of this. I contributed to this conversation. And I said, look, it looks like there's a problem here. Like you're mocking Christianity. And why would you do that? And my complaint was a little different. I didn't get into this is satanic and I can't believe you're mocking Christianity. You would never do that about Islam. I didn't get into that. I looked at it and I said, look, when we have a controversy like this and you have drag performers and it appears that they're mocking Christianity, well, the drag performers get mixed in with trans folk. So that was the nature of my concern. I was like, look, you're doing this event, you're doing this art, if you will, and it's going to have blowback more so on the trans community. And we're already having a big, huge social fight about the trans community. This is not going to help us move forward. Like, this is just going to hurt them while you get to be celebrated, while you get to be on stage and doing your thing and whatnot. So for me, I looked at it a slightly bit differently. And then we kind of see everything starts trending down again, and it's going up. Now it's 5 a.m. and then we get here to that very top. So 6 a.m. Today, it's starting to go up again, and I imagine that we'll see the trending go back up. But I suspect by now that we're going to probably not see. My guess, if I had to guess, 9 a.m. July 28th, which would be yesterday morning. That was the so far highest peak for Last Supper. It was also the highest peak for Dionysus. I suspect that for both of these, we're not going to see it peak any higher, but we might. So we'll have to, go ahead and go to Google Trends and see. So now the question is, what does this tell us? Like, how does this prove or disprove that maybe they were being forthright in what they were telling us? Here's the thing. What we want to do is we want to say, we want to look at when did they come out and start apologizing? And we want to compare that. And I don't have specific timestamps of when they came out and apologized, but they did not come out and apologize immediately on Friday. It was sometime either Saturday or Sunday. And so I apologize for that. I did not get the timestamps of when that specifically occurred. But if you go and you look at the news stories and you go and you look at the trends and you go and you look at Twitter search, it looks very clear to me that number one, a lot of people immediately recognized it as appearing to be the Last Supper. It also looked like there were some people who immediately were questioning whether or not it was a proper depiction of Dionysus. In other words, there were some people out there that were like, they weren't talking about the Last Supper. They were talking about, hey, this is Dionysus, and would he really be blue? Would he really be doing this? And they were questioning whether or not the depiction was in some way accurate. And then we look at the Olympic Games, and their official X account shows that they had posted just a very generic description of what they were doing at 4:10 p.m., well before any of the controversy really, really blew up. And so it seems to me that they are being forthright when they say this was not intentional to offend Christianity. Now, I also want to point out, if you look up Dionysus and you go to Wikipedia, it says, quote, he's the god of winemaking, orchards and fruit, vegetation, fertility, festivity, insanity, ritual madness, religious ecstasy, and theater. And so if you take all of those words and you go back and you look at the picture, remember, he's this blue Smurf is being presented on a plate with the lid, and the lid is being lifted off like it's a dinner meal. Right? Now that has nothing to do, as far as I know, with the Last Supper, because there was no platter, that was presented, or at least not that I'm seeing, that I recall being depicted. And so this does seem to match. This Wikipedia description does appear to match what they depicted. Now, as to why they specifically chose drag performers, or what they were, what kind of, what they were trying to, the message they were trying to send with the table and the feast. And again, the feast of Dionysus is also depicted there. So you could equally say this looks like the Last Supper, and you could similarly say this looks like a feast of Dionysus, right? It's both. So then the question is, what was their intent? Well, again, we wouldn't really know their intent. So we can only look at what the evidence that we have available that's not going to try to persuade us. And this is where we look at things like the metadata. That would be the time that some of these things were posted. And when we look at the way that we look at the timestamps and the way and what people were saying in real time at the time, like, we're going back, but we're looking at it, retrospectively, but it was in real time. And we see that there is both. There are people that were like, hey, this is Christianity, and other people that were saying, hey, this is the Greek god. And, some of them were questioning certain things about it. But most importantly, when those conversations were being had and as they were on the rise, they were not in full swing and there was not quite yet the global anger when the Olympics made their initial tweet. So when they made their initial tweet, things were still pretty chill because it was at 4:10 p.m. Like they had just barely got past the opening ceremony. Now, a lot of people have kind of pointed out, I've seen some other people point out, like, hey, there's still debauchery and all this other stuff. Well, yes. I mean, if you are talking about a god of winemaking, orchards, fruit, vegetation, fertility, festivity, insanity, ritual madness, religious ecstasy, and theater, well, that sounds like there's going to be some debauchery. And that's not exactly foreign for Greek gods. Like a lot of the Greek god stories had debauchery and all kind of craziness in them. So to say like, hey, it's debaucherous, that makes sense. It would be, right, on some level. And so, and then drag does have a tendency to mock or, either in a negative way or in a fun way, various things. Generally, they mock, the stereotypes of gender and sexuality, but they broach other areas as well. So for me, I'm looking at it and I'm saying, as somebody who started off being critical of this, I'm going to say I got it wrong, as did many other people, and that the benefit of the doubt should be based on all the information that we have available. The benefit of the doubt should be that maybe they actually weren't trying to intentionally mock Christianity and that we got it wrong. And it's okay to say that. It's okay to look back and say, you know what? I jumped the gun on that. Now, let me ask this question because it kind of came up, as I'm looking at different tweets, and I'm watching things play out. A lot of people were pointing, like Andrew Tate was one to make this point. He said, talking about the persecution of Christians. If you were to ask and say, are Christians persecuted? It's going to be debatable and depends on who you ask. Now, I will argue that in the US, most people live well and without violence generally aimed at any particular group, despite all the pleas that we hear to the contrary. So let's go back in history and look, and let's talk about it really quickly, just really briefly. We're not going to spend a lot of time on it. 2021, I had a podcast episode, and I don't remember the number, but you can go back and you can look where, actually, I do remember it was called Bills, Bills, Bills. I don't remember the specific number, but in that particular podcast, I was criticizing a bill that President Biden had signed. And that bill was the 2019 the COVID-19, not 2019, the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act. And so this was an act where they signed legislation talking about hate crimes that had allegedly been going up against Asians. Well, I happened to look at the data, and the data did not say that there were actual crimes against Asian people occurring or spiking. What happened was, at the time, there was an organization that had collected a lot of information from people who had submitted their testimony of experiences that they had. Many of those experiences were not crimes. They may have been unpleasant interactions with fellow Americans, but they were not crimes. And that culminated into passing legislation at the federal level. And I criticized it for good reason, because the evidence didn't match the claim. Similarly, since October 7th, and actually even a little bit before, there have been claimed hate crimes against Jews. And when I say claimed, I don't mean there were crimes and they were against Jews and they never really happened. There was a claim that they had spiked, they had increased, and that there was more concern now for the Jewish community based on all these incidents. Well, again, when you look at the data doesn't seem to support that. Now, in both cases, the data doesn't say that nothing has happened. What it says is that there isn't a spike, there isn't this sharp increase, because that's much different. It's different to say there is an increase of something happening versus it's not happening at all. So my claim is not that these things are not happening. My claim, my argument, based on the data that I see, is that there are not increases in hate crimes or crimes, if you will, against Asians or Jews. And we have passed legislation for both. I criticized legislation here in Jacksonville, and they had passed some legislation that was claimed to be fighting against Jew hatred. And I said, I don't think there's Jew hatred. There are some dummies, some retards that are getting out and putting up a few signs, but they're basically like 5 or 10 people that nobody knows really who they are. They don't have any funding. They don't have any power. They're just people getting out with signs, and that in itself does not mean that hate crimes are actually going up. Now, again, that doesn't mean that we can't find instances where somebody maybe attacked another person because of their race or their gender or what have you. The question isn't, can we find an instance? Because that's not what makes a trend go up. What makes a trend go up is when we can look and say, what's happening, say, a year ago? What is happening today? What has happened in between those two times? Have we seen a steady increase? And then we have to be clear about what we're defining as a crime. So, in the instance of the 2021 bill, COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, which was claiming that Asians were having hate crimes against them, and look, I'm not Jewish, so I have no vested interest in necessarily Jew hatred, like not any personal one, because I'm not Jewish. None of my family members are Jewish. However, my wife is Asian, my son is Asian. So if there are hate crimes going up toward, against Asians, then I have a vested interest in that because those are direct family members, my wife and my child. And when I looked at the data, I said, nope, doesn't appear that this is actually happening, not the way that people are claiming. And so this is what we have to evaluate. We have to evaluate the information, the evidence, based on what it says, not based on what we think it says. And when I looked at those two, I said, no, that these are not, the trends are not going up. Now, there may be trends going up of people saying mean things online. There may be trends where, hey, last year we only saw a couple of protests with nasty signs, and this year we see, more than a couple. We see maybe twice as many, right? So there may be trends in rhetoric, but rhetoric and violence are entirely different. Or put another way, words are not violence. Violence is violence. We also periodically hear that there's like things like transgenocide. Well, when you look into the data, that's also not true. And when you look into some of the claims that the trans community is suffering a certain disproportionate level of hatred and violence toward them, we also find that is not as it's claimed, because much of the violence happens to be intrapersonal violence. So it's not violence of, say, a non-trans person who has simply decided that they don't like a trans person and going and beating them up or whatever they're doing. We're not seeing those kind of things, not on any appreciable trend going up. Again, you can find stories of those, just the same as you can find a story of somebody who attacked a Jewish person for the purpose or for the reason of being a Jew. We can also find people who were being hateful and attacking Asians simply because they were Asian. It's not that you can't find the stories. That's not in question. Again, the question is, are the trends going up? The truth is that when you look at the data, it's simply not true. Not for those groups, not for Christians either. Not here in the US. Now, outside of the US, things may be different depending on where you go. But the question here is that I'm concerned with is what's going on in the United States? Start there. Because if we can't get it accurate in our own country, where we live, where we interact with other people, then how much better are we going to be when it comes to interpreting what's happening in another country with people that we do not know and that we're not familiar with the vibe of what's going on. Like, I'm familiar with the vibe that's going on here in Jacksonville because I live in Jacksonville. I talk to other people in Jacksonville. So I have a better feel for it. Same thing with Florida. I know I have a lot of friends in Florida and I talk with them on social media and I know what's going on. I have Jewish friends and I ask them, I say, "Hey, how are you personally feeling? What is the vibe in other Jews that you're associating with?" And and I do that for friends that are in Florida and friends that are outside of Florida. The problem is that most groups, pretty much all groups, they don't want to hear this because I think that there is some level of woe is me. And why that is, I'm not really sure, but it does seem to be present. It seems to be present with Asians, and I'm generalizing, right? Not all Asians. It seems to be present with Jews. Again, not all Jews. Seems to be present with the trans community. Not all trans, right? Uh, Christians, not all Christians, right? But there is this large component. There's this large group within each of these groups that want to hear they're being persecuted and refuse to hear anything else. And then there are members of each of those groups that are willing to listen and say, you know what? The data doesn't show this. Now, why is that important? Well, it's important because what message are we sending people about how they should go about their lives? If we say that there's Asian hate and it's increasing because of COVID-19, then we tell the Asian community, you have reason to be fearful. So we've now basically told them, you need to be stressed and concerned and worry, as if they don't already have things to worry about, regular everyday things that all of us worry about. You know, am I going to get this project done for the boss on time? Yeah, hey, the company's laying off people. Am I going to be one of them? Hey, my water heater broke. Do I have the money to replace it? Like, hey, my car broke down. How can I get it fixed? Hey, my parent or my sibling or somebody that I love or I'm friends with has passed away. How am I going to get past it? All of us share a lot of things that we deal with on a daily basis. And it's important that we don't add to it. We have enough stress, even here in the first world. We have enough. We don't need to add to it. So it's on us to be diligent about what the evidence says and what it doesn't say. And here in the US, the evidence does not point toward specific persecution of particular groups. Now, that doesn't mean there isn't a culture war for which somebody that we oppose is fighting for control of. That doesn't mean there aren't bad things happening or things happening that we would prefer not. That's not what that means. There are still shootings. There are still people that are trying to get their agenda passed through legislation, right? All of these things are still happening. But the real question is, are we at risk of violence from our fellow Americans? Are people necessarily, in this case, mocking us? Well, in this particular case, they weren't. At least that's what the evidence says. That doesn't mean it's never happened, especially in art. Like, if you go back, one of the first things that I thought of, and you may or may not remember this, depending on how old you are, but one of the first things I remember, or I recalled when I heard about this, and people were saying, "Oh, Christians just get offended. They're perpetually offended. Blah blah blah." And they were and conservatives and Christians, and so. And the first thing I was like, well, in fairness, there has been art that has been intentionally offensive toward them. So maybe you might remember something called "Piss Christ." Now, if you've never heard of it, the two words, well, whatever you think of when you hear it is exactly what it is, right? It's an artist took a crucifix and they stuck it in a jar with their urine, closed it up, and called it art. And I don't remember what year that happened, but that happened probably about a decade ago, maybe 20 years ago, something like that, right? So we've had works of art that have been offensive. But if you actually go up, I challenge you to go Google and just type in offensive artwork. And there's plenty of sites that'll say the top 10 most offensive artworks over time. And there are a few pieces that seem to be present in all of those lists. And then each of the lists seems to have a few that they've, specifically selected that maybe another list didn't claim to be the, part of the top 10. So there's quite a few pieces of art out there that have occurred over time globally. This is not just limited to the US, that people found offensive for one reason or another. So again, it's not that you can't find things to be upset about. We certainly can. But what we want to do is we want to determine whether or not there's an actual trend. And maybe the trend exists in one area, but not in another. If you were to go to Palestine and you were to say, is Jew hatred, up? It might be, probably. It probably is. But is it, in is violence towards Jews up? You might be able to make an argument, I don't know what the data specifically says, again, in terms of trends, but you might be able to find that Jew hatred is up. But you're not going to find it, in my opinion, that violence toward Jews or Asians or trans or Christians or any other group is up in the United States. And that's important because it tells us who we're living with. It tells us the lay of the land and what we can expect. When I go to the store with my son, I have a strong expectation that somebody's not going to attack us for the sheer reason that my son is Asian. Or when my wife takes my son out, like right now, they're out. They went over to the gym to go work out. He likes to work out with her. And I have high confidence that they will go to the gym and come home safely without incident. Now, it's possible that something could happen. Anything is possible because, again, there are one offs here and there. Those things do happen. But the trend tells me that I can comfortably do this podcast, make these comments, and when I'm done, go downstairs and find that they went to the gym, enjoyed a good time at the gym, got a good workout, and came home safely without incident. So, what do we do about all of this? What's the answer? Well, I think there's three things that we can do and that we must do. And we have to remind each other because, again, I got in on this. I tweeted out on Friday something because I looked at it and said, well, that must be the Last Supper. And there's no way that you could say anything otherwise. Like I literally made that claim. And this was before I had heard about the argument that it was actually about Dionysus. So the three things that we can do. Number one, reserve judgment for anything controversial for at least 24 to 48 hours. I mean, how many times do we need to find out the hard way that the first 24 hours, there was a lot of lack of information, and that lack of information led us to the wrong conclusion. And people make a lot of assumptions, and we all do it. This is not just me. This is not just you. Everybody does it at some point. So if we can reserve judgment and say, all right, something just happened. What are the details? And it doesn't matter whether it's a seemingly controversial art show or whether it's a shooting. There's a lot of information that is not present that could change your perspective that we need to wait for. So if we can wait 24 to 48 hours and then remind each other, be like, hey, hold up, before you get too deep into that position, give it some time. Let's see what information comes out, right? We can be skeptical and we can say, what's going on here? But maybe not maybe reserve our strongest judgment until we have more facts. Number two, give the benefit of the doubt and the most charitable interpretation to controversy. Imagine if we had said, I bet, or hey, I think that this opening ceremony is not making fun of Christianity, but it's doing something else, even if I can't yet put my finger on what it's doing, what it's trying to tell me. And to be honest with you, when it comes to art, art can be very difficult sometimes to interpret. I don't know how many times I've seen a piece of artwork, a film, or something, some sort of art, and I've had this immediate response to it, and then found out later that my immediate response would have actually been different had I understood it better. So a lot of times I think we need to give the benefit of the doubt in the most charitable, and it can be art, it can be a tweet. What do you mean by that when you said that? Right? Or it could be a comment. Your friend says something, they make a joke, and you're like, wait a minute, what do you mean? Were you trying to be racist to me? Maybe they were, or maybe they weren't. So if we give the most charitable interpretation, that allows us to get through that 24 to 48-hour period without making things worse. Because right now, there are a lot of Christians out there that are very angry at the Olympics. But the question is, do they need to be angry? And is the reason for their anger even correct? So far, I'm looking at it saying no. And the last thing, treat others better than they treat you. So let's say that we give the benefit of the doubt and we say, you know what? Maybe this is something else and it's not what my initial gut tells me. And I'm going to wait 24, maybe 48 hours to hear what new information comes out about this, this piece of art that I've just seen that looks very, very offensive. And then let's say that a couple days later, somebody, we get more information and we look at it and we see, you know what? You were being offensive. And now we have the proper evidence to support this claim. If we treat people better than they treat us, then that leads to a world, most likely, that they'll remember that in the future. So maybe this time they're making something offensive, but it becomes increasingly harder to be offensive to us, whoever us is, if we treat them better. Because if you make let's just take me and my family, for example. Let's say somebody's out there watching and they don't like what I say. So they find a picture of me and my family that I posted on social media. They take it and they do some modification of it, right? They photoshops to make it look very offensive. If I come out and I lash out at them, well, the next time that they want to mock me, they're going to mock me and they're going to say, well, yeah, you lashed out at me. You said these things about me. You said these very terrible things about me. And so they will use my response for the next time that they want to do this. And so then the next time I'll probably lash out again, right? And so then we just end up creating this vicious cycle where it gets to a point where it really no longer matters who started it, because both sides are going back and forth at each other. And in many cases, it becomes very, very difficult to even determine where did it start? Who was the originator of this problem? And a lot of conflicts, if you look at them, they end up being that way. If you look at a lot of conflicts, it usually gets to a point where it really doesn't matter who started it, because both sides are so poorly treating the other that you could pick a side and say either side and say, yeah, the other ones are the bad guy, because both sides are being the bad guy. So treat others better than they treat you. All right, folks. Thank you for watching. Hope you found this episode informative and inspiring. Be sure to catch me Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. Eastern, for an informed discussion on politics and culture. Make sure that you are subscribed to my Twitter Twitter, to my YouTube or my Rumble account. If you prefer, you can go to youtube.libertydad.com or rumble.libertydad.com. You can also find me on Twitter and you can follow me there as well. Let me know how I'm doing by leaving me a comment. Last but not least, if you're a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great week. Catch you next time. But for now, I'm out.